So today we're reading Against Me by Johnathan, Safran, Foer. Now, this is my first time reading it, so it'll be as new to me as it is to you. The fruits of family trees. When I was young, I would often spend the weekend at my grandmother's house. On my way in Friday night, she would lift me from the ground in one of her fire-smothering hugs, and on the way out Sunday afternoon, I was again taken into the air. It wasn't until years later that I realized she was weighing me. It was My grandmother survived World War II barefoot, scavenging Eastern Europe for other people's inedibles, rotting potatoes, discarding scraps of meat skins, and the bits that clung to the bones and pits. So she never cared if I colored outside the lines as long as I cut coupons along the dashes. I remember hotel buffets while the rest of us erected golden calves of breakfast. She would make sandwich upon sandwich to swaddle in napkins and stash in her bag. For lunch, it was my grandmother who taught me that one tea bag makes many cups of tea. As you're serving, that every part of the apple is edible. Okay, so far in this paragraph right here we're reading, we notice that he begins to speak about how his grandmother was a World War II survivor. So she takes good care of his weight, feeds him every so often, and makes sure he's healthy. Okay, let's continue reading. Her obsession with food wasn't an obsession with money. Many of those coupons I clipped were for foods she would never buy. Her obsession wasn't with health. She would beg me to drink Coke. My grandmother never set a place for herself at family dinners, even when there was nothing more to be done. No soup bowls would be topped off, no pots to be stirred or ovens checked. She stayed in the kitchen like a vigilant guard in a tower. As far as I could tell, the sustenance she got from the food she made didn't require her to eat it. We thought she was the greatest chef who ever lived. My brothers and I would tell her much several times a meal, and yet we were worldly enough kids to know that the greatest chef who ever lived would probably have more than one recipe, chicken with carrots, and that most great recipe involved more than two ingredients. And why didn't we question her when she told us that dark food is inherently more healthful than light food, or that the bulk nutrients are found in the peel or crust? The sandwiches of those weekend stays were made in the shaped ends of pumpernickel loaves. She taught us that animals that are bigger than you are very good for you. Animals that are smaller than you are good for you, which aren't animals, are fine for you, when then tuna, which aren't fish, then vegetables, fruits, cakes, cookies, and sodas. No foods are bad for you. Sugars are great. Fats are tremendous. The fatter the child is, the fitter it is, especially if it's a boy. Lunch is not one meal, but three to be eaten: 11, 12:30, and 3. You are always starving. In fact, your chicken with carrots probably was the most delicious thing I have ever eaten. But that had little to do with how it was prepared, or even how it tasted. Her food was delicious because we believed it was delicious. Now, as we read on throughout this article so far, we understand that how much, keeping her sort of her grandchildren healthy, keeping them good, nice and healthy, but the way she's feeding them isn't the greatest. Alright, let's read on. We believed in our grandmother's cooking more fervently than we believed in God. More stories could be told about my grandmother than anyone else I've ever met. Her otherworldly childhood, the hairline margin of her survival, the total of her loss, her immigration and further loss, the triumph and tragedy of her assimilation, and while one day I tried to tell them to my children, we almost never told them to one another, nor did we call her any of the obvious and earned titles. We called her the greatest chef. The story of her relationship with food holds all of the other stories that could be told about her. Food for her is not food. It is terror, dignity, gratitude, vengeance, joy, humiliation, religion, history, and of course love. It was as the fruits she always offered us were picked from the destroyed branches of our family tree. Now you see, he begins to explain how much the food really does mean to her, how much it really matters, stuff like that. So, next. Possible again. When I was 2, the heroes of my bedtime stories were animals. The first thing I can remember learning in school was how to pet a guinea pig without accidentally killing it. One summer, my family fostered the cousin's dog. I kicked it. My father told me we don't kick animals. When I was 7, I mourned the death of a goldfish I had won the previous weekend. I discovered that my father had flushed it down the toilet. I told my father, using other, less familiar language, we don't flush animals down the toilet. When I was 9, I had a baby sister who didn't want to hurt anything. She put it just like that when I asked her why she wasn't having chicken with my older brother and me. Hurt anything, I asked. You know that chicken is chicken, right? Frank shot me a look. Mom and Dad entrusted this stupid woman with their precious babies. Her intention might or might have not been to convert us, but being a kid herself, she lacked whatever restraint it was that so often prevents a full telling of a particular story. Without drama or theoretic skipping or euthanizing, she shared what she knew. Now, just from reading those certain parts, you could tell this person does not like to eat meat because she doesn't like to hurt animals. She doesn't like to eat animals. So I'm reading a little bit ahead, skimming ahead a little bit. She's vegetarian. Okay, let's continue. My brother and I looked at each other, our mouths full of hurt chickens, and simultaneously, how in the world could I have never thought of that before? And why on earth didn't someone tell me? Moments I put on the fork. Frank finished the meal and probably eating a chicken as I typed these words. What our baby sister said made sense to me, but not only it seemed self-evidently true, but also it was the extension to food and everything my parents had taught me. We didn't hurt family members. We don't hurt friends or strangers. We don't even hurt unupholstered furniture. My not having thought include farm animals in the list. Didn't make them exceptions to it. It's just made me as a child ignorant for the world's workings, until I wasn't. At which point I had changed my life. Until I didn't, my vegetarianism, so bombastic and unyielding, in the beginning lasted a few years, sputtering quietly died. I never thought of response to our baby sister's code, but found ways to smudge and diminish and ignore it. Generally speaking, I didn't cause hurt. Generally speaking, I strove to do. All right. So far he's starting to actually see what his sister was talking about, and understand what the point of being a vegetarian really was. The right thing, generally speaking, my conscience was clear enough to pass the chicken. I'm starving. Mark Twain said that quitting smoking is among the easiest things you can do. He did all the time. I would add vegetarianism to the list of easy things. In high school, I became a vegetarian more times than I can remember. Most often, as effort to claim a bit of identity in a world of people whose identities seem to come effortlessly. I wanted a slogan to distinguish my mom's Volvo's bumper. A bake sale caused to fill it the self-conscious half hour of break, and an occasion to get closer to breasts of activist women. And I continuously to think the wrong to hurt animals, which isn't to say that I refrained from eating meat, only that I refrained in public. Many diners of leisure began with my father asking any dietary restrictions that I need to know about tonight. When I went to college, I started eating more meat more earnestly, not believing in it, whatever that would mean, but willingly, pushing the questions out of my mind. It might well have been the prevalence of vegetarianism on campus that discouraged my own. I found myself less likely to give money to street musicians whose case is overflowing with bills. But when at the end of my sophomore year, I became a philosophy major, and I started doing my first seriously pretentious thinking. I became a vegetarian again, the kind of active forgetting that I was sure eating meat felt required to paradoxical to intellectual life. I was trying to shape. I didn't know the details of factoring farming, but like most people, I knew the gist. It is miserable for animals, the environment, farmers, public health, biodiversity, rural communities, global poverty, and so on. I thought life could, should, and must conform to the mold of reason. Period. You can imagine how annoying this made me. So as you can read through here, you can see the points he's making about being a vegetarian, how he's thinking when he wasn't a vegetarian and when he was. Now, when he goes into college, he becomes a more, smart aleck. He thinks about things. Like, he thinks about things a lot more detailed than he usually would since he becomes a vegetarian. Now, he's not a full vegetarian, as he states multiple times, but he shows that he eats meat at times, not always. Alright, thank you for watching, and goodbye.